The human was supposed to be a medic, so why is he covered in enemy blood? And this is the trauma unit, Human Reynolds. Miles Reynolds resisted the urge to sigh as he followed Medical Director Threx through the gleaming white corridors of the Galactic Alliance medical frigate Merciful Hand. The 7-foot-tall Valaxian's upper pair of arms gestured expansively, while her lower pair tapped notes into a datapad. Her iridescent scales shimmered under the harsh medical lighting as she spoke without bothering to look back at him. Your credentials are adequate for a human. You will be assigned primarily to triage and basic wound management. Nothing requiring significant expertise, of course. Miles nodded politely. Of course, Director. I'm just happy to help where needed. The truth was that Miles held advanced certifications in emergency xenomedicine from 3 different systems, but the Galactic Alliance Medical Corps had a way of looking at human qualifications the way a chess grandmaster might view a toddler's finger painting. Technically an achievement, but not really in the same league. The Grex physician will supervise your work directly, Threx continued, waving a dismissive upper hand. They're tolerant of less evolved species, and quite patient. How fortunate for me, Miles replied, keeping his tone carefully neutral. 6 months into his deployment on the Merciful Hand, and he still got treated like he'd just learned which end of a med scanner to hold. They entered the main medical bay, where a dozen different species of medical professionals moved with practiced efficiency. The frigate served as the primary medical support for the Galactic Alliance's 7th Defensive Fleet, currently patrolling the borders near contested Krell space. Ah, there's Dr. Pauline now, Threx said, gesturing toward a gelatinous green blob pulsating near a row of diagnostic equipment. The Grex oozed toward them, pseudopods forming and dissolving as it moved. Human Reynolds, greetings. It bubbled in a surprisingly melodic voice. I trust you are adapting well to our ship. Yes, Doctor. Thank you for asking, Miles replied. At least Pauline treated him with basic courtesy, even if the Grex still insisted on explaining concepts Miles had mastered years ago. A nearby Centauri medic with 6 arms and compound eyes flicked an antenna disdainfully. Just keep the human away from the surgical suite. I heard they still use metal blades on their homeworld. Miles bit his tongue. Earth medicine had moved well beyond scalpels centuries ago, but these stereotypes persisted. He'd learned it was easier not to correct them. Human Reynolds will assist with the Cephalan soldiers brought in from the skirmish yesterday, Threx announced. Their physiology is simple enough even for human comprehension. Miles nodded again. The Cephalan's aquatic humanoids with bluish skin had relatively similar biology to humans. It was definitely within his comfort zone, but also well below his capabilities. I've treated Cephalans before, he offered, and their hemocyanin-based blood requires. Yes, Threx interrupted. Just follow standard protocol and call a real medic if anything deviates from baseline. 3 hours later, Miles was elbow-deep in blue Cephalan blood, calmly talking to a soldier with a severe abdominal wound. You're going to be fine, he assured the nervous soldier. The shot missed your secondary circulation node by 2 centimeters. How can you tell without the imaging system? The Cephalan gurgled through his breathing apparatus. Miles shrugged as he applied a regenerative compound. I've seen enough Cephalan anatomy to recognize the landmarks. Your species has very consistent internal arrangement. Dr. Pauline oozed over, pseudopods extending sensors into the wound. Impressive work, Human Reynolds. Your manual dexterity is quite remarkable. Thanks. It's just basic trauma care, Miles replied, though he felt a small surge of satisfaction at the rare compliment. As Miles finished treating the Cephalan, the ship's general address system crackled to life. All personnel, this is Captain Vex. We have detected anomalous readings at our perimeter. Standard alert protocols are. The captain's voice cut off abruptly, replaced by the shriek of alarm klaxons. The lights dimmed, then shifted to the red emergency setting. What's happening? One of the junior medics cried out. Miles was already moving, securing his patient and reaching for emergency supplies. He'd heard that particular alarm sequence before. We're being boarded, he said calmly as the first explosion rocked the ship. The next explosion came closer, vibrating through the deck plates beneath their feet. Medical equipment rattled on trays. A Malorian medic with delicate antennae fell to her knees, overwhelmed by the sensory input. "Everyone stay calm," Dr. Pauline bubbled, their gelatinous form rippling with agitation despite their words. "The Merciful Hand is a medical vessel. We are protected under galactic conventions." Miles said nothing as he quickly secured loose equipment and checked the seals on emergency med kits. His experience suggested that whoever was attacking them probably didn't care much about galactic conventions. The ship's comms crackled again. "All personnel, we are under attack by Krell forces. Security teams to defensive positions. Medical staff, prepare for casualties and secure all patients." Director Threx's scales had paled to a sickly yellow. Krell raiders? This deep in Alliance space? Impossible. "Apparently not," Miles muttered, already moving to the storage lockers to retrieve additional supplies. The lights flickered again as another impact shuddered through the frigate. The main doors to the medical bay slid open as security personnel began rushing in wounded crew members. They'd breached decks 5 through 7, a Vulcan security officer reported, her normally sleek feathers ruffled and singed. "They're heading for central control," and she broke off as her communicator chirped. "Spirits preserve us. They're heading for medical too." Panic rippled through the medical bay. Unlike military vessels, medical frigates had minimal defensive capabilities and security personnel. They relied on their protected status and escort ships for safety. "We need to evacuate all ambulatory patients to the secondary medical bay on the lower deck," Threx ordered, her voice higher than normal. "Dr. Pauline, coordinate the critical care transfers. Everyone else, move." In the chaos that followed, Miles found himself separated from the main group as he helped a sedated Ursan patient onto a hover stretcher. A deafening crash from the corridor outside made him instinctively duck beneath a console. Seconds later, the auxiliary doors blew inward with a shower of sparks and twisted metal. 3 hulking figures in the distinctive black and red armor of Krell raiders stormed in, weapons raised. "Nobody move." The lead raider bellowed, his translator making the words echo metallically. "This medical facility is now under Krell control." Miles remained hidden, watching as the remaining medical staff froze in terror. The Krell were notorious for their brutality, reptilian humanoids with natural armor and a cultural disdain for what they called the weak species. They particularly despised medical personnel, considering them a contamination of natural selection. "Where are the nerve toxins and battlefield stimulants?" the raider demanded, grabbing a trembling Zenthari nurse by one of her arms. Please," she chittered, compound eyes wide with fear. "This is just a standard medical bay. We don't keep combat drugs." The Krell backhanded her, sending her crashing into a diagnostic console. Miles felt a cold calm settle over him. He glanced around, assessing resources and escape routes with practiced efficiency. The raiders were focused on intimidating the visible staff, giving him a momentary advantage. Silently, he reached into the emergency kit he'd been preparing and removed several items: a pressure injector, surgical bonding spray, and an oxygen concentrator. Not exactly standard weapons, but they would do. The lead Krell was now shouting at a cowering Dr. Pauline, whose gelatinous form had shrunk to half its normal size in fear. "Your ship has valuable medical supplies and equipment. Tell us where the main storage is located, or we start executing patients." Miles carefully modified the pressure injector, maximizing its force output and loading it with a sedative potent enough to drop a Ursan into hibernation. For a Krell, it would likely cause temporary paralysis. Their metabolism would process it too quickly for unconsciousness, but it should buy some time. As he worked, Miles whispered to the Ursan patient beside him, who was groggily regaining consciousness. "When I move, roll off the stretcher and stay down. Can you do that?" The bear-like alien blinked slowly but nodded. Miles took a deep breath. He might not be respected as a medic on this ship, but there were skills from his past that might just keep them all alive. Miles waited until the lead Krell turned away from Dr. Pauline, then made his move. He rolled from beneath the console, aimed the modified pressure injector at the gap between armor plates at the raider's neck, and fired. The pressurized sedative hit with a force that would leave a nasty bruise, but more importantly, it delivered its payload directly into the Krell's bloodstream. The raider managed one strangled grunt before his limbs locked up, and he toppled forward like a felled tree. The other two Krell spun toward the commotion, weapons rising. What the one began. But Miles was already moving. He sprayed the surgical bonding agent directly into the faceplate of the second raider's helmet. The fast-hardening compound, designed to seal severe wounds in seconds, immediately obscured the Krell's vision. The raider clawed frantically at his helmet as Miles ducked behind a medical cabinet. The third Krell fired, missing Miles, but hitting the oxygen concentrator he'd deliberately left on the floor. The device exploded with a whoosh of superheated air, not powerful enough to seriously hurt anyone but sufficient to create a disorienting flash and smoke. "Sorry about the mess," Miles called out as he slid across a treatment table, grabbing a bone saw from a nearby tray. With practiced precision, he brought the non-cutting edge down on the third Krell's wrist joint, a pressure point in their species that caused immediate numbing and temporary paralysis of the limb. The weapon clattered to the floor as the Krell howled in surprise and pain. "What is happening?" Director Threx gasped from where she'd taken cover. Miles didn't reply as he delivered a precisely targeted strike to the vulnerable nerve cluster at the base of the third Krell's skull, another anatomical weakness he'd memorized during his xenophysiology training. The raider collapsed, unconscious. The second Krell had managed to rip off his helmet, but that only made him a clearer target as Miles picked up the fallen raider's stun baton and applied it with surgical precision to the exposed scales under the Krell's jaw, a perfect conductor for the electrical charge. In less than 40 seconds, all three raiders were incapacitated. The medical bay had gone completely silent. Every alien face was turned toward Miles in expressions of shock that transcended species differences. "Secure them quickly," Miles ordered, tossing restraints to the nearest staff members. "More will be coming." "How did you?" Dr. Pauline's voice trailed off, their gelatinous forms still quivering. "The neck joint in Krell armor has a 3mm gap," Miles explained as he checked the raider's vital signs with professional detachment. "And their suboccipital nerve cluster is particularly sensitive to direct pressure. Basic xenoanatomy." Director Threx had regained some of her composure, her scales slowly returning to their normal coloration. That was not basic xenoanatomy, Human Reynolds, that was combat knowledge. Miles shrugged as he collected more medical supplies, repurposing them for defensive use. On Earth, emergency medical personnel are often trained to handle dangerous situations. Call it a cultural quirk. Before anyone could question him further, the comms system crackled with static. "Medical Bay. This is Security Chief Lorne. We have multiple breaches throughout the ship. What's your status?" Miles picked up a comm unit. "This is Miles Reynolds. We have 3 raiders contained, but the main medical bay is compromised. We have wounded and non-ambulatory patients here who can't be moved quickly." "Reynolds? The human medic?" The security chief sounded confused. "What happened to Director Threx?" "I'm here," Threx cut in, taking the con. "The human assisted with neutralizing the immediate threat." There was a brief pause. "Understood. We're stretched thin across the ship. Security can't reach your position for at least 20 minutes. Can you hold that long?" Miles was already examining the doorframe, calculating how to secure it against further intrusion. "We'll do our best." "Reynolds out." 20 minutes. A Malorian nurse whimpered. "We're medical personnel, not fighters." "Neither am I." Miles lied smoothly. "I'm just a medic who pays attention. Now, help me move these patients away from the doors and windows." As the staff began following his instructions with new respect, Miles heard a commotion from the corridor outside. 8 more raiders were approaching. "Everyone get back," he ordered, positioning himself between the damaged door and the vulnerable patients. In his hands, he held a defibrillator unit that he'd quickly modified to deliver a much stronger charge than standard. "Human," Dr. Pauline oozed closer, their voice quiet. "You are not simply a medic, are you?" Miles gave the Grex a grim smile. "Let's just say human medicine takes a more holistic approach to preserving life." The door burst open, and 4 more Krell raiders charged in, only to face a surprisingly prepared human medic whose techniques for patient care were about to get much more aggressive. The skirmish was brief but violent. When it ended, 4 more Krell raiders lay incapacitated on the medical bay floor, while Miles methodically zip-tied their limbs with surgical tubing. "Is everyone all right?" he asked, wiping a streak of Krell blood from his cheek with the back of his hand. His uniform, once pristine white, now bore splashes of various colored fluids, predominantly the orangish red of Krell blood. The medical staff stared at him in stunned silence. Finally, Dr. Pauline's gelatinous form pulsed forward. "Human Reynolds, I believe we require an explanation." Miles sighed as he finished securing the last raider. He glanced up at the wide-eyed medical team. Even Director Threx seemed lost for words, her 4 arms hanging limply at her sides. "I was hoping to avoid this conversation," he admitted, reaching for a medkit to treat a shallow cut on his arm. "But I suppose appearances can no longer be maintained." "You said you were a medic," Threx said accusingly. "I am a medic," Miles replied calmly. "A very good one, actually. I just happen to have additional training." A momentary lull in the distant sounds of fighting gave them a chance to regroup. Miles gestured for everyone to gather closer. "Wait police. We means." On Earth, our military medical personnel, particularly those assigned to special operations, receive extensive combat training alongside their medical education. Miles applied a sealant to his wound as he spoke. "We call them combat medics, para-rescue jumpers, or field surgeons, depending on their specific roles. Your healers are also warriors." A young Cephalan medic looked bewildered by the concept. "Is that not a contradiction?" Miles shook his head. "We see it as complementary. The primary duty is always to heal and save lives, but sometimes that means you have to fight to reach the wounded or protect your patients." "But you displayed knowledge of Krell physiology that went beyond medical understanding," Dr. Pauline observed. "You knew exactly where to strike to incapacitate." "Before I joined the Galactic Alliance Medical Corps, I served 10 years with Earth's Combined Special Forces Medical Division," Miles explained. 4 of those years were spent embedded with forward combat units in the Perseus conflict. Director Threx's scales shifted to a deep blue, an indication of surprise among Valaxians with the Perseus conflict. "But that was the first major encounter between humans and the Krell." "Yes," Miles finished for her. "My unit was responsible for extracting wounded from contested territories, often behind Krell lines. We learned their anatomy very thoroughly, both how to heal them when they were prisoners and how to efficiently neutralize them when they were threats." He stood up, checking the medical bay doors. Earth insisted all their personnel in the Galactic Alliance have combat training, regardless of their primary function. The Alliance Command thought it was barbaric and unnecessary for medical staff, so they classified that part of my background. "They just omitted that information from your service record?" Dr. Pauline sounded scandalized. Miles nodded. Alliance bureaucracy decided that Earth's militaristic tendencies would contaminate the purely humanitarian nature of the medical corps. "So officially, I'm just a medic with decent credentials." You see, a distant explosion shook the deck plates beneath them. "Well," Threx said, her scales now a thoughtful purple, "I believe we can all agree that the Alliance's decision was short-sighted." Miles smiled wryly. "I did try to tell them during my initial interview. They weren't interested. They weren't his den. Was engaged in Wayne and so." "What do we do now?" asked one of the nurses, looking at Miles with new respect. Miles considered their situation. The ship's security was overwhelmed, communications were spotty, and they had at least 20 minutes before reinforcements would reach them. Meanwhile, they had critical patients who couldn't be moved and limited defensive resources. "We need to secure this section of the ship," he decided. "The raiders will keep coming for the medical supplies. They'll expect minimal resistance from medical personnel. And we shall provide more than minimal resistance, Dr. Pauline concluded, their gelatinous form straightening with newfound determination. Miles nodded, then began outlining his plan to the increasingly attentive medical staff. To his surprise, even Director Threx was listening with focused intensity. "I need to know what each of you can do," he told them. "Not just your medical specialties, but any skills that might be useful in our current situation. And I need to know what medical supplies can be repurposed for defensive measures." As the staff began to share their capabilities, Miles felt a strange sense of satisfaction. For the first time since joining the Merciful Hand, his colleagues were looking at him not as an inferior human medic, but as someone with valuable expertise. Now they just needed to survive long enough for that new respect to matter. "Remember, these are precise dosages," Miles instructed as he handed modified pressure injectors to 3 nurses. "Too little won't incapacitate a Krell. Too much might kill them, and we're still medical personnel bound by our oaths." The makeshift defensive team nodded seriously. They had transformed in the past 15 minutes, from terrified medical staff to determined defenders. Even Director Threx had shed her administrative aloofness and was helping prepare chemical compounds that would produce disorienting smoke when combined. Sensors show movement in the corridor, reported a Xanthari technician who had repurposed a medical scanner to detect life signs through the walls. At least 6 biosignatures, approaching from the port side. Miles nodded. "Just as we expected. They're trying to flank us." He turned to Dr. Pauline. "Is your team ready at the secondary entrance?" The Grex pulsed affirmatively. "We have prepared as instructed, though I must confess, using neuropathic stimulators as weapons feels deeply unethical." "The stimulators will only cause temporary sensory overload," Miles assured them. "No permanent damage. Remember, we're not trying to kill anyone, just protect our patients and retake critical ship systems." The plan was audacious but logical. Rather than simply defending the medical bay, Miles had organized the medical staff into 3 teams, one to protect the non-ambulatory patients, one to secure their immediate area, and one led by Miles himself to push back and reclaim the ship's central medication dispensary. Without access to that facility, they couldn't properly care for the growing number of wounded being reported throughout the ship. "Positions," Miles said quietly as the sensor readings showed the Krell raiders getting closer. Everyone moved with remarkable coordination for non-combat personnel. Miles felt a surge of professional pride. Medical staff were already good at handling high-stress situations and following precise instructions. They just needed the right guidance to apply those skills in a different context. The first team of raiders burst through the secondary entrance exactly where Miles had predicted. They were immediately met with a concentrated spray of aerosolized sedative and the carefully calibrated neuropathic stimulators that overwhelmed their sensory organs. 4 Krell went down before they could fire a single shot. Team 2, secure and restrain, Miles ordered through the comm unit they'd rigged from medical communicators. Team 3, prepare to move out. Miles led his team of 5 through the now cleared corridor, each member armed with repurposed medical equipment. A Malorian nurse carried a modified surgical laser that could cut through the weaker points of Krell armor. A Cephalan medic had filled spray bottles with a compound that would temporarily blind but not permanently damage eyes. Miles himself carried several pressure injectors and a makeshift shock baton created from medical power cells. They encountered resistance at the junction, leading to the dispensary 3 Krell raiders guarding their prize of medical stimulants and painkillers. A diversionary tactic. Now, Miles whispered. The Xanthari technician released a small diagnostic drone they'd reprogrammed. It flew toward the raiders, emitting a high-pitched sound designed to disturb Krell auditory membranes. As the raiders turned toward the noise, Miles and his team struck from multiple angles, applying their medical knowledge with devastating precision. One by one, the raiders collapsed as pressure injectors delivered carefully formulated compounds to very specific points in their anatomy. Check for injuries, Miles reminded his team as they secured the unconscious raiders. Even in combat, he maintained medical priorities. They reached the medication dispensary to find it ransacked but mostly intact. 2 Krell were still inside, loading stimulants into containers. Surrender and you won't be harmed, Miles called out, surprising himself with how naturally the battlefield negotiation came back to him after years away from combat. The Krell responded by opening fire, forcing the medical team to take cover. Neutralizing agent ready, the Melorian nurse reported, holding up a canister of fast-acting but harmless gas they'd concocted from available chemicals. Miles nodded. Release on my mark. The ensuing confrontation was brief but decisive. Within minutes, the dispensary was secure, and Miles was already organizing the team to administer emergency aid to an injured Krell raider. You are very strange, Human Reynolds, the Cephalan medic observed as they helped stabilize the wounded raider. One moment a warrior, the next a healer. Miles shrugged as he carefully inserted an IV line. To me, they're not separate roles. Both are about preserving life. Sometimes you heal with medicine. Sometimes you heal by stopping those who would do harm. Their comms crackled to life. Reynolds, this is Director Threx. Security teams have reached our position and are securing the medical bay. What is your status? A dispensary secured, Miles replied. We have wounded here, including Krell raiders requiring medical attention. There was a pause before Threx responded, a voice carrying a new note of respect. Acknowledged. Treat all wounded according to standard protocols. Security will handle prisoner transfer once they're stabilized. Understood, Miles said, then returned to treating his patient who, just minutes before, had been trying to kill him. The Cephalan medic shook his head in amazement. Humans are very confusing. Miles smiled slightly as he worked. You have no idea. 3 days after the attack, the Merciful Hand was docked at Galactic Alliance Station Epsilon for repairs. The casualty count had been remarkably low, thanks in large part to the unexpected resistance from the medical personnel. Most of the ship's systems were back online, and patients were recovering well. Miles entered the main conference room, where the debriefing was scheduled to take place. He was surprised to find not only the ship's command staff, but also several high-ranking Alliance officers he didn't recognize. Human Reynolds, Director Threx greeted him, her scales a warm golden color that indicated respect in Valaxian culture. Please be seated. We have much to discuss. Miles took the offered seat, feeling slightly uncomfortable under the scrutiny of so many senior officers. Admiral Kett, an imposing draconian with metallic scales and 4 eyes, leaned forward. We have reviewed the reports from the Krell incursion. Most illuminating. I was just doing my job, sir, Miles said automatically. That is precisely the point of this meeting. The Admiral rumbled. What exactly is your job, Human Reynolds? Because according to Director Threx's report, you demonstrated skills far beyond standard medical training. Miles glanced at Threx, who nodded encouragingly. I am a fully qualified medical professional, Miles began carefully. But as I explained to my colleagues during the attack, on Earth, military medical personnel often receive combat training as well, particularly those assigned to special operations units, as I was. Yet this information was omitted from your Galactic Alliance service record, a stern-looking Pellaran officer noted, consulting a datapad. Not by my choice, Miles pointed out. When I joined the medical corps, I was told that my combat experience was inappropriate for a healer and might make patients uncomfortable. The recruiting officer classified that portion of my record. Admiral Kett made a sound that might have been a laugh. And now we find ourselves with a ship full of medical personnel who owe their lives to those very skills. Director Threx's scales rippled with color. Admiral, if I may. Human Reynolds demonstrated exceptional judgment during the crisis. He neutralized threats with minimal force, prioritized patient care throughout, and organized non-combat personnel effectively. His actions saved many lives, both Alliance and Krell. Miles blinked in surprise. This was significantly more praise than he'd ever heard from Threx. Indeed, the Admiral agreed. Which brings us to the purpose of this meeting. The Krell incursion has exposed a critical vulnerability in our medical operations. Our healers are trained to save lives, not defend them when security fails. A holographic display activated in the center of the table, showing statistics from the attack. Of the 17 Alliance vessels targeted in this coordinated Krell raid, The Merciful Hand suffered the fewest casualties and was the only medical frigate to successfully repel boarders without external assistance, the Pellerin officer noted. Miles was starting to see where this was heading. Admiral Kett fixed all four eyes on Miles. Human Reynolds, the Alliance Defense Council has approved a new training protocol for medical personnel, particularly those serving on vessels in contested regions. We would like you to help develop and implement this program. You want me to train medics to fight? Miles asked, wanting to be absolutely clear. We want you to train them to survive and protect their patients, Threx corrected, as you did. The next hour was spent discussing details of the new program. To Miles' relief, the focus remained on defensive techniques, patient protection, and minimal force responses rather than turning medics into soldiers. The ethical boundaries of his profession would remain intact. As the meeting concluded, Admiral Kett approached Miles privately. Jule. There is one other matter, Human Reynolds. A rather unusual request from the Krell prisoners you treated. Miles raised an eyebrow. Sir? Several have expressed interest in learning about Earth's healing warriors concept. The Admiral seemed both amused and perplexed. Apparently they found the idea of a medic who could also defeat them in combat to be worthy of respect. Their cultural understanding of strength is evolving in unexpected ways. Miles couldn't help but laugh. I'd be happy to explain the concept to them, Admiral. Later that evening, Miles was updating patient records when Dr. Pauline oozed into his office. I have received the revised protocols for human medical personnel, the Grex announced, extending a datapad from a temporarily formed pseudopod. Miles took it curiously and began reading. His eyes widened as he reached the new section titled Human Medical Staff, Special Handling Procedures. The document contained a detailed classification system for human medical personnel, including warnings such as: Note: human medics should not be assumed to be non-combatants. In crisis situations, security staff should coordinate with, rather than direct, human medical personnel. And all ships carrying human medical staff are required to maintain a dedicated training facility where these personnel can maintain their edge. A human idiom referring to combat readiness. Miles laughed out loud at the final recommendation. In the event of hostile boarding actions, release the human medic and evacuate the area. Do not interfere with their methodology unless non-combatants are at risk. Is it accurate? Dr. Pauline inquired, their gelatinous form pulsing with what Miles had come to recognize as curiosity. It's a bit dramatic, Miles admitted. Not all human medics have combat training, but I appreciate the sentiment. Dr. Pauline's form rippled in what might have been the Grex equivalent of a shrug. The Galactic Alliance has existed for 7 centuries, Human Reynolds. In that time, no species has ever developed a medical tradition that also encompasses warrior skills. It is unique. Humans are full of surprises, Miles said with a smile. Indeed. Which is why I supported your appointment as the new Director of Emergency Response Training. Miles blinked. My what? Did Admiral Kett not inform you? You have been promoted. You will develop training programs for all medical personnel in the fleet, with a focus on emergency response in hostile situations. Miles sat back, momentarily speechless. I believe the human expression is poetic justice? Dr. Pauline continued. 3 days ago, you were considered merely an adequate medic with limited potential. Now you are perhaps the most valuable instructor in the Alliance Medical Corps. Miles thought about the journey that had brought him here from combat medic on Earth to underestimated human on an alien ship to his new role as instructor. Life does have a sense of humor, he agreed. But there's one thing I need to make clear in my training program. What is that? Human Reynolds. Miles gestured to his newly cleaned uniform, no longer stained with the various fluids of battle. A good medic should never be covered in anyone's blood, enemy or otherwise. If they are, something has gone very wrong indeed. Dr. Pauline's form vibrated in what Miles now recognized as laughter. I believe that will make an excellent first lesson, Director Reynolds. And somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of the Galactic Alliance, a new footnote was added to the official guidelines for integrating new species. When encountering humans claiming to be just a medic, exercise appropriate caution.